right, yep, I can start letting people in.
What they really care about is what they spoke about.
Okay, hi guys. Hope you can all hear me. Thanks for joining today. We're all really happy to be presenting the third part of our series, which is a Radiology Applications Masterclass series. And today we're really lucky to have a panel looking at radiology interviews. So we've got a panel of 6 people today, and it should be a really, really exciting and interesting discussion that we can have. Without further ado, I'll hand over to our first speaker, who is Dr. Matthew Seeger.
Hi, hello everyone. Hopefully you can hear me there. Thank you very much, Sachin. Thank you very much to everyone for tuning in. And thank you to IR Juniors for inviting us to help with this webinar. My name is Matt Seeger. I'm a final year interventional radiology trainee at King's. We'll also be hearing from Jamie Russell, who's another final year trainee working at Imperial. And then we've got a panel of 4 SC1s who've been through the interview process very recently. So we've got Saif and Shay, who are with me at King's, and then Andrea and Pi, who are with Jamie at Imperial. So we'll all be doing a little bit. I'll go through the plan now. I'm going to start off by talking about the application process this year, focusing on how to demonstrate commitment to radiology at the interview, which I think is the key part of the interview station. Jamie's going to be doing a little bit more about general interview prep, looking at some common questions and how to structure answers. And then we'll have the ST1 perspective, having been through the process very recently last year. And then finally, there's time for panel discussion and questions. So please ask questions throughout and we'll get through as many of them as we can. So this is the application process this year. We're at this point. So you guys have done the MSRA, awaiting the results, I understand. We're here to talk about this, so the interviews. This is just lifted from the college website, and you can see that the invitations to interview will be circulated by the 19th of February. I think actually on the PDF document that is accompanying this, they've said that the interviews will be circulated on the 19th of February. Either way, they've said that the interview slots are offered on a first come, first served basis. So as soon as you see that email from Oriel, it's really important to try and sign up as soon as you can so you get your first choice. Think about when you want to do the interview as well. It may not be sensible to go for the kind of graveyard shift on the Friday afternoon. I'd favour morning and earlier in the week, but just keep an eye out so you get a slot that suits you. This is, I'm sure you're all aware, that's just a link to the website where all the application information is available. Worth just touching on the fact that they have said there will be a potential plan B. In plan B, there will be no interviews, so hopefully they're not enacting this because this webinar would be fairly pointless. Yeah, just something to bear in mind. Obviously, it's a fairly fluid situation. Presumably, plan B is quite unlikely given that the COVID situation is generally improving, but it's something to bear in mind, and I'm sure they'll update you as and when there's information about that. So moving on to the interview, the key difference this year is obviously that it's all done via MS Teams. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with MS Teams. Certainly in our hospital, we use it for all our MDTs and clinical meetings. If you're not using it frequently, it's worth having a little look at it. It's very simple to use. I don't think you're going to need much of the functionality which is available. It's just going to be, clicking on a link and opening the interview. But do familiarize yourself with it beforehand. I think the most important thing to look at is, or to think about, is where you want to do your interview. So whether that's at home, if you've got a reliable internet and a sort of environment where you're not going to be disturbed for 50 minutes, or you're going to do it at work, whatever suits you best, have a little think about it beforehand. I think that if you are doing it at home, make sure you've got a backup plan for your internet. So it's odds law that you have very reliable internet and it goes down the moment you're trying to do something really important like this. You may already have been asked to sign an applicant declaration form, which is this form from HEE, which basically resolves them of any responsibility. So it's really important because they could be fairly ruthless, like old Jackie Weaver was a couple of weeks ago. So they don't want to have any issues afterwards. So do try and have a backup plan for any eventualities whereby internet is misbehaving. So the interview itself is going to last 15 minutes long, which is obviously a relatively short period of time to sell yourself. So you need to make sure you get across as many excellent points about yourself as you can. They've told you that it's going to cover different criteria from the person specification, and specifically to assess your commitment to the specialty and your communication skills. And I think it really is the key part of the interview, is just showing that commitment to radiology. And for me, I think it's working out the people who really do want to do radiology versus people who've put it as a second or third choice and aren't so sure about it. That's the point of the interview. So if you're in that first category, you just need to show all of the things that you've done, and you'll be totally fine. With this in mind, it's really important to know and prepare from the person specification. So when you're preparing for the interview, have the document open, make sure you've got points you can talk about for all aspects of the person specification, because it's all going to come from there. And the interviewers will be using that in order to ask you questions. So this is just lifted from the commitment to specialty parts of the person specification, and it contains all the usual things you think would be on there. The left-hand column is the essential criteria, middle column, desirable criteria, and then there's how they're going to be assessing you as well. So in terms of the interview in this setting. But it contains things like, understanding the role of imaging in the current practice, evidence of time spent in the department, so your taster weeks, and also understanding the role of a consultant nuclear medicine physician or radiologist in the modern NHS. So have a good look at this, and again, think about how you would answer questions in these particular areas. So how do you demonstrate your commitment to specialty? Well, things to mention and discuss during your interview. I would suggest your taster week. They've already told you that is, it's an essential criteria that you've done one. Think about, some people may have done taster weeks in district general hospitals, some people in teaching hospitals. Think about how radiology is different in those two settings. Think about the life as a trainee. Show evidence that you spoke to the trainees there, you found out what it's like, what the training is like. Other things to mention or show off about really are radiology-based audits that you may have done, any radiology-based teaching you've been involved with. And then also have some knowledge about the radiology training, how it works, and how the exams are structured. I was definitely asked about this. I remember it was a very generic open question, like, tell me about radiology training. And I was giving a very mundane answer about, you do 3 years of core training, 2 years subspecialty, the exams are X, Y, and Z. And I think that's exactly what they were after. It's just showing that you've taken the time to learn about it, either by looking up the curriculum or speaking to trainees during your taster weeks. So they really do just want to know basic things like that, so you know what you're signing up for. It's just worth touching upon briefly that there is a plan to change the curriculum or introduce a new curriculum from 2021, which is a little bit different. So if you can talk about that as well, that would be really great. It's all available on the college website. The documents are like hundreds of pages long, so don't read them cover to cover, but just have a look at the structure. The main thing they're changing is moving to a bit more of a generalist type training. So you do 4 years of core training with 1 year of subspecialization, which has its strengths and weaknesses, which you can talk about. But yeah, so knowing how the training works and when the exams are is also really important. Other things to mention are any conferences or courses you have presented at, ideally in the field of radiology, just showing, again, that all linking it back to radiology. Threats or challenges to radiology. So you may be asked about specific issues, or you may be asked to tell them about an issue of your choice. I think things that can come up and often come up are things like the lack of radiologists. So the college have done lots of work on this, trying to raise the point that we're chronically short of radiologists in this country. The amount of imaging increases something like 10% each year, yet the number of radiologists is fairly static. So clearly the curves are diverging and there's a big problem there. And the college are trying to do a lot about that. Artificial intelligence is a so-called potential threat. I think I'd turn a question about AI kind of on its head and say that whilst it could be a potential threat, we should be working with developers to produce technology which is as helpful for radiologists and patients as possible. And if you've got a few specific examples about that as well, that would be great. Outsourcing is another sort of challenge in radiology. So we're very reliant on outsourcing in NHS, either to staff on calls in the sort of DGH settings, or to clear backlogs in DGH and teaching hospital settings. There are strengths and weaknesses about that. The college have got standards that outsourced reports must reach. So have a little look at that document and see what you think about that. Often the clinicians aren't the biggest fans of outsourced reports, but at the same time, the people doing them are often in a slightly difficult situation. They don't always have the relevant clinical information, so understandably produce quite defensive reports. But being able to talk about that and highlighting the strengths and weaknesses is very helpful. Finally, another potential threat is so-called turf wars in interventional radiology. So most frequently vascular surgery doing more and more endovascular procedures. Again, you could talk about your taste a week, how you've seen, radiologists and interventional radiologists and surgeons working cohesively, if you have, even if that's not strictly true, to show, using all their skills together, working in a team, that's the way to go forward. But anyway, those are some sort of the common things that come up in terms of threats and challenges in radiology. I think when you're describing X or Y skill that you have, whether that's teaching, communication, leadership, management type things, always state why it's helpful as a radiologist and bring it back to why that particular skill is useful as a radiologist, just to show that you, again, have thought about what it's like to be a radiologist and what makes a good one. So how to prepare? Well, Jamie's going to cover a bit of this, but just know your strengths and weaknesses. On the weakness side, it's quite a common interview question to be asked about a weakness. It's always a bit of a balance between, you don't want to say something so fundamentally flawed, but you can pick any weakness really, but as long as you're showing that you are aware of it, you've got that self-awareness and you're reflecting on it and trying to change, and maybe in some feedback that you've had, then I think that's a really good answer. But knowing your strengths and weaknesses and how they fit into the person specification is the important way to go. I would prepare answers for the kind of really obvious ones, like why you want to do radiology, which you have a high chance of being asked. But when you do prepare stock answers, always be careful that you answer the question you were actually asked, and you don't just go off on one and ask the question you wanted to be asked. So you have to be able to think on your feet, but having a few stock answers and a few stock points that you can make are really helpful, and then you can adapt that to the question that you're asked. And again, we've kind of touched on that. Make sure you can talk about each part of the person specification. You've got a real specific example of your own practice, which you can talk about, and you've covered all those areas. So just to go through a potential kind of answer, how you might tackle one of these questions. So you could be asked, why is it important that radiologists have good communication skills when they just sit in dark rooms and don't look after patients? So you could say something like, good communication skills are vitally important for radiologists. Having attended MDTs during my taster week, I learned that the radiologist leads the MDT and needs to summarize complex imaging findings in a pertinent, clear manner, as well as advise on management. Secondly, excellent communication skills are also needed in interventional radiology, where patients are often scared and underprepared for the procedure and require empathy and reassurance from the interventional radiologist. After having witnessed difficult consent processes during my taster week, I always try to ensure my patients are aware of the procedure they're referred for and answer any questions they have beforehand. This means the consent process has already started by the time they reach IR. Finally, radiology is unique in that radiologists are judged on a daily basis on the quality of their written communication skills when they report scans. I always take time to read and reflect on good or less clear reports. I've also read the RCR standards for reporting imaging investigations to ensure I have a good baseline understanding of what makes a good radiology report, and hopefully I can soon develop my own succinct and clear reporting style as a radiology trainee. So I think this kind of covers a few areas which are hopefully quite helpful. I think first of all, it's structured. So it's kind of signposted with 3 points. I think with a sort of open question like this, it's often helpful to have 3 things to say. You signpost it clearly, then it's obvious when your answer is finished. It has a start and end to it. It's personable because it talks about your own specific examples, and as I say, it's specific, so you're talking about actual real things that you've witnessed or that you do in your practice, which is more relatable for the interviewers to take in. It's also got some confidence to it as well. I think a lot of medics are very guilty of underselling themselves during these kind of things. So, it has vision for yourself, it has ambition, it shows that you want to be producing your own reports as a trainee, you want the job that they're basically hopefully going to offer you. I think all of this intertwines with showing commitment and an understanding of what radiology is actually like. So finally, just some good resources, some stuff to look at before the interview. The RCO website has, as I say, it's got lots of stuff on there. Have a little look at the curriculums that I mentioned, but again, don't read it cover to cover, but just have a feel for what it's like, what the changes are. The college has got loads of documentation, loads of publications and standards. Again, pick out 2 or 3, have a little look at, so you've got some examples of things to talk about. The ISC medical website, they have a book which is pretty good. It's like a generic medical interview book, and it's got some stuff that applies to radiology, but it's also on their website, they've got quite a few questions which are freely available, and you can practice with those. There's a radiology interview book, which Jamie and I wrote a couple of years ago now. I can assure you that we stand to gain absolutely nothing financially if any of you buy this, of the result of this webinar, so we have no conflicts of interest. But yeah, we wrote it a few years back, and it was more focused on the previous iterations of the interview process, so there's a few more stations, but there was still a commitment to specialty station at that stage, so there is a little bit in there about that. Radiology Cafe is a really good website. It's got stuff about the interviews, getting into radiology beforehand, and you'll find that it's helpful throughout your training as well for exam preparation and then consultant interviews at a later date. There's also your local and hopefully friendly radiology department. So you may have mentors who you organised your taster week with, go to them. Can you have a practice interview with them? Talk to the trainees again, who may also give you mock interviews or give you other tips about what the training is like and more content to talk about. And then, of course, the IR Juniors website, which the guys have put together, which is excellent. So that's it for me. Apologies for the terrible radiology joke. I don't know if we've got generated any questions, or should we probably move on to Jamie to do the next bit, and then we can look at questions. But thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That was great. So my name's Jamie. I'm one of the Imperial trainees in my final year. So started a year after Matt, and I'm going to cover a bit more about sort of the specifics of the interview, sort of preparation, the day itself, and sort of how you can tackle some of the questions using frameworks. So I'm just going to attempt to share my screen. Okay, great. So radiology interview itself. So finally, time to ditch that stethoscope, which I'm sure you've been waiting to do for a couple of years now. So first of all, don't be like this guy. This guy looks very nervous, and it's natural to be a bit nervous about an interview, but you shouldn't be. It's your time to shine. You should be positive about it. And as medics, we don't really get enough chances to show off, all our achievements. And an interview is really a great opportunity to do that. So, try and be positive about it, and prepare, and you look forward to it. So it's natural to be nervous, but don't be too nervous. So, Matt covered a lot of these things about the changes to the 2021 recruitment, so I won't dwell on them really. But, as you know, the college initially had 2 plans. Plan A for online self-assessment, MRSA, an interview for the candidates ranked 56 and below, and Plan B was for no interview whatsoever. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we're still sticking to Plan A. If we're going for Plan B, then obviously the rest won't be so relevant for you, but hopefully we're still on for Plan A with the situation as it is. The timeline, I think Matt already went through. I just saw a question actually on the thread with the point that the invitations to interview were initially going to be circulated on the 19th of February, but apparently that might be the 1st of March. I think either way, it's important to keep track of that date. It's a very important date because booking the interview slot is you'll be wanting to get a good slot. I'll just come on to that on my next slide. The interviews themselves I don't believe the dates have changed. They're due to take place between the 9th and the 12th of March. So how can you get ahead of the game? Well, the invite to interviews, we don't know exactly, sorry, it's just the 19th of February, but we don't know exactly when it's going to be. Could be the 1st of March, but certainly keep track of it, because as soon as the opportunity becomes available, you should book your slot on Oriel. Remember to select a time that works for you, but also consider the interview panel. They're human beings, and their mood at 5 p.m. on a Friday is likely to be different than their mood, say, early on a Monday or a Tuesday morning. So times to reconsider booking your interview slot would be kind of late on the Friday, or even late any of the afternoons, or I've always thought late in the morning. I get a bit hypoglycemic myself, so it's possible the interviewers might be feeling that way as well. So I remember when I applied for my interview, I booked a slot kind of Monday, or I think it was on the Tuesday morning, actually, kind of early-ish, so around 9 or 10 a.m. And the interviewers seemed friendly enough. So next, become a Teams wizard. I'm sure, most of you already are probably a lot better at using Teams than myself, but I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but download Teams if you haven't already, and just in the next month or so, just call, the next few weeks even, because it's not that long left, call your friends, call your family, call your pets, and just practice to practice interviews, and just talk to people on Teams and make sure you're really familiar with the technology. The interview itself, it's been much simplified this year. It's 15 minutes and it's a single station. And this is directly from the candidate information document provided from the college. So the interview station will have a different criteria from the person specification and last approximately 50 minutes. It will assess your commitment to the specialty and communication skills. So, really importantly, commitment to specialty and communication skills. So from that, a couple of sentences, I think they're giving you a real clue here of the types of questions they're going to be asking. So how can you assess someone's communication skills? Well, firstly, through how someone presents themselves in an interview. And it's really important that interview technique is as important as the content of your answers sometimes. And coming across as a confident and good candidate can be improved with practice. So in terms of interview technique, we can break down your communication skills into non-verbal and verbal. So just to run through some important non-verbal communication skills in this new world of Teams and Zoom. Just remember to smile. Smiling conveys confidence and personality to the interviewers. And even if you're nervous, just don't forget to smile, because I think it really does make you more personable and friendly. Look into the webcam. I'm guilty of not doing that right now because I'm reading my slides, but remember to look into the webcam, not into the interviewer's eyes on the screen, because when you're looking at their eyes on the screen, you're not actually looking into their eyes. With your hands, kind of resist the urge to fiddle. If you're a fidgeter, maybe sit on your hands or something, but don't have them in view of the camera, sort of moving around. It's a bit distracting. Make sure you sit up straight as you would in an in-person interview. I think just the act of sitting up straight makes you project your voice better, makes you feel more confident. Your appearance is important, even though you'll be at home. Your camera will be on, so try to look reasonably smart. I'm sure you all will. I'm sure that's a fairly obvious point. Certainly smart from your waist up, anyway. Engage in active listening. So that means when the interviewer is speaking to you or asking a question, just tilt or nod your head in understanding, because that shows that you're actively listening to them and makes you appear more engaged. In terms of your verbal communication skills, vocal clarity is really important, especially on Teams. So, sit upright, project your voice, speak really clearly, and remember to test your microphone for quality before the interview, because, audio quality can vary a lot depending on your internet connection, what device you're using. On the day itself, you don't worry if your voice wavers initially. You'll settle into things after you begin speaking for a few minutes. In terms of the length of each of your answers, interviewers have been shown to lose concentration after around 3 minutes of listening. So most structured points can be made in 2 to 3 minutes, and you certainly shouldn't be going over 3 minutes for each answer. And the shorter you can keep your answers and more succinct, the more questions they can ask you and the more points you can potentially score. When you're nervous, it can be tempting to speak really quickly, but don't be afraid to pause to consider the question before jumping into an answer. Try to take your time, and if you're in the habit of speaking really quickly, just slow yourself down, take a deep breath, and be calm. If you're someone who tends to speak in a kind of monotone, that can be quite boring for the interviewers, really. So try and change your inflection, emphasize words, just to prevent the interviewers from getting bored, which I'm sure they won't, because I'm sure your answers will be fantastic. Just a bit of housekeeping, which I think Matt has already covered, really. Make sure you pick a good spot ahead of time. Make sure there's good natural lighting, and without too much glare. Make sure you don't have any distractions near you, like a phone that's buzzing or email notifications popping up on your computer. Make sure you have your ID ready. I think this college has specified that you'll need to have a driver's license or a passport with you. And make sure the room you're in is reasonably tidy, for the point that I will come on to. So this again is from the college. And they've stated that before the interview commences, applicants will be briefed on the interview process and will be required to confirm their identity with the interview administrator. It is therefore important that applicants have suitable photographic ID available, which could be a passport or a UK driving license. In addition, applicants will be required to move their camera to show the entire room where they are undertaking the interview to confirm that nobody else is present. So, make sure that that room is reasonably tidy, no sort of piles of laundry. I'm sure that's a fairly obvious point for you. Good. So, in terms of the actual answers to your questions, I think it's useful to have some frameworks in mind to be able to answer specific questions. And in general, questions asked at interview can be divided into motivational questions, situational questions, opinion questions, and more specific radiology related questions. So examples of motivational type questions include things like, what are your greatest strengths? What are your greatest weaknesses? What is your proudest achievement? And motivational questions can be tackled using a structure called CAMP, C-A-M-P. So the C of CAMP is clinical, the A is academic, the M is management, and the P is personal. So just to run through a worked example of answering a motivational question using CAMP, for example, what is your greatest strength? There are a couple of different ways that this question could be asked. So you should consider how the interviewers can change it slightly, but still mean the same thing. So what is your greatest strength could also be phrased as, what is the strongest area of your CV, or what makes you stand out? And how to answer that question? Well, you should be using examples from your training thus far to demonstrate your strengths and reflect how they relate to radiology training. I think that's a really important point that Matt covered. You need to talk about your strengths, and even more importantly, you need to reflect on how they relate to radiology. Everything in this interview, you should try to relate to radiology, because that's the important goal. You guys want to be radiology regis. You want to be radiology consultants, essentially. So if you divide your strength into those 4 areas, your clinical strengths, they can include things like postgraduate exams, maybe a medical school prize, your academic achievements, that could be a publication, a presentation, some of you may even have research degrees, your management strengths, so things like taking on a formal management role within your department, being a member of a committee, helping to update guidelines. Personal achievements can really be anything from, running a marathon, playing, team sports, or being involved in charity work. And I think you should pick no more than 2 from those categories together, because if you want to limit your answer to less than 3 minutes, you should really be picking 1 or 2 of those areas, probably 2. So moving on to situational type questions. The situational questions relate to specific situations that you've come across so far in your training. So examples of those would be, how have you shown good leadership, or how have you demonstrated good communication skills? And situational type questions can be tackled using something called the STAR approach. So STAR. The S is for situation, the T is for task, the A is for action, and the R is for result. So a worked example of a situational type question, I think Matt covered a similar thing about communication skills, but obviously that's a theme this year. So you should have answers really thought up already for these types of questions. So how have you demonstrated good communication skills? Other ways they could ask that would be, do radiologists need good communication skills? Tell us about your communication skills. So how to answer? We should use examples of your own written and verbal communication skills and demonstrate that you know the importance of these in radiology. Once you've thought of an example, you can tackle the answer using a STAR approach. So essentially, you should think of a situation that you've encountered at work or out of work that has demonstrated good communication skills, and then you should go on to talk about how they relate to radiology. So this is just something that I thought up when I was making this presentation. By no means has to be anything like this, but my situation was, you're an FY doctor and there's an unwell patient on the ward. Your registrar is busy looking after another patient. The task is that the patient required stabilization and referral to ITU. The action that you took was you initiated a referral to initially reluctant ITU registrar using an SVAR approach. And the result was that the patient received appropriate care and you put in a system in place for ongoing ITU referrals. So that has just demonstrated how your communication skills in the form of your referral to the ITU reg has had a good result. And then after that, you can go on to talk about how communication skills are important in radiology. So the next type of questions which you'll encounter are opinion questions. So what do you think of X? And in this interview, these opinion questions are all going to be related to radiology things. And you can essentially need to provide a balanced answer. So you need to think of the positives and the negatives, and then form some kind of opinion. But you should by no means be leaning totally on one side. You should try to provide a balanced opinion and sit on the fence, really, because the people interviewing you, they might have their own opinions about things, and you don't want to annoy an interviewer by saying something completely one-sided. So a worked example of an opinion type question is, what do you think of outsourcing? Another way this could be asked would be, what is teleradiology, or should radiologists be allowed to work from home? And the aim of your answer is to convey a balanced and well-informed opinion. You should do this by discussing both positives and negatives. And at the end of discussing the positives and negatives, you could even think of a possible solution to the problem of outsourcing. Things like radiology networks, or insourcing. So getting consultants from the trust to report extra work instead of sending it out to private providers. So just as an example of outsourcing, some of the positives you could mention would be that emergency scans can be reported in a timely fashion, and the on-call reporting volumes can be reduced, which allows radiologists to provide a full in-hour service. Some of the negatives include costs of private reporting services. Sometimes there's reduced efficiency if scans are double reported, so they might be looked at once by the teleradiology consultant overnight, and they might be looked at again by the in-hours consultant for an MDT. They also have a negative effect on training, which I think is important for you guys as potential registrars. So you should really try and sit on the fence, because it's possible that the person interviewing you, they might do loads of teleradiology themselves. They might have a strong opinion. So you should really try to have a balanced view. And then moving on to the specific questions about radiology. This is things like, why have you chosen radiology? Tell us about your audit, research, teaching you have done. And for these types of questions, you can use a mixture of CAMP, a mixture of or STAR. It really is up to you how you tackle those questions. And I'm sure that those types of questions, you guys will already have thought of some good things to say. So just to provide a worked example of the why radiology question. So other ways they could ask that would be, what do you like about radiology? Why should you be offered a radiology training post? And the way to answer that question using a CAMP approach is to explain your own motivations whilst implying why you're a suitable candidate for selection. And you can sort of pick your the sort of strengths or what you like about radiology from those categories. So clinical reasons why you've applied for radiology. It's a challenging specialty. There's a wide range of different subspecialties. Academic reasons, it's an evidence-based field. It's very technology driven. And there are lots of rapid advancements such as AI. So management reasons, there's lots of opportunity for clinical audit. You could mention, having looked at the RCR Audit Live website, and personal reasons. You might enjoy working with lots of different clinical teams. So that's just a way of really categorizing the good things about radiology using a CAMP approach. And finally, moving on to the more specific questions about commitment to specialty. I put lots of different questions up there, but these are lifted from the book that I wrote with Matt, and these are questions that have certainly come up in lots of previous interviews. And I think for most of these questions, you should have at least thought of ways to approach them, and certainly have things in mind to say. As Matt said, the danger of using a stock answer is that if the question is slightly different, you might misinterpret it. But certainly have things in mind, certainly for most of these. So what are the greatest challenges facing radiology? What do you think the future of radiology is? How will 7-day working affect radiology? How do radiologists learn from mistakes? What are the different subspecialties within radiology? Tell us about training and different types of training schemes. What is the role of the consultant radiologist? And then what can you bring to radiology? What will you miss as a radiologist? You need to know a bit about PACS and how that works. You need to know a bit about skills mix. Also about ionizing radiation legislation, things like IRMA. And we've covered a bit about outsourcing, which is always a hot topic. So those are the sort of specific commitment to specialty questions that that Matt and I thought of when we wrote the book. So I think I've covered really everything I wanted to go through, and I think now the plan was to move on to some questions. Okay.
So I think there's one question on the Slido, just regarding the question about management/communication, and asking, is it better to use a clinical example, or can we use an academic teaching or other example?
So the one about management communication. I mean, I think I don't think it hugely matters actually where you take your example from, because communication skills can be demonstrated in your academic practice, in your teaching practice, or in your clinical practice. So I think as long as the example you use, you cover all those points with the STAR approach, and then you relate it back to radiology, I think you can use an example from any field. It doesn't have to be clinical.
We've got a few more questions coming in. So one question is, can you see anything COVID specific coming up for the interview? Like maybe how radiology services have been affected by COVID or things like that? Or do you think that's something that's quite, I guess, transient and they're less likely to ask?
I think that could come up. I think that would be a fair question. I think it would be a tough question, but I think it would be feasible. Some of the ways, I mean, so obviously in London, it's been pretty bad. Certainly in my hospital, they more or less cancelled all elective imaging, essentially. It was just inpatient urgent stuff happening. So having an awareness of the impact of COVID on radiology is really important, because there's going to be a huge backlog of imaging to get through, both kind of urgent type scans looking for cancers in patients who may well have them, through to more elective imaging. So thinking about how we're going to tackle that is a huge issue. And then also how radiology has worked and adapted as well to COVID. So in intervention, there's lots of examples of people setting up line services to help the ITU teams to put all the lines in. On the diagnostic side, setting up extra meetings so that it's really easy for the clinicians just to have to go through all their cases that they're struggling with, where they want people to look at their scans and have a bit of a problem-solving type meeting. So I think it would be feasible, both in terms of the recovery and how radiology has been able to help during the pandemic as well.
So a few people are asking about audits that are not in radiology. People have done various other training schemes and things. Would you recommend talking about those, or would that be looked on negatively at all?
Sorry, go on, please.
I was just going to say that there are a few questions about teaching outside of radiology or audits outside of radiology. And I mean, from my experience, most of my portfolio was from outside of radiology. It was mostly med ed in a broad sense. And I think as long as you can sell it as being relevant, as long as you think it's relevant, all you have to do is convince people in front of you that it's relevant, and it is relevant. So as long as you can take what you've learned from it and why that makes you a good candidate for radiology and why that's important for radiology, then I personally think it's fine. Obviously, if you have radiology related stuff, great. But if you don't, then you definitely can sell it, as long as you make the people believe you.
And then also leading on from that, if say you've done an audit but it hasn't fully been completed yet, then can you discuss that at all?
Yeah, again, I think so. I think as long as, if you have one where you've got the full cycle, and that's great, but equally still mention the other ones, particularly if it's got some relevance or where you can link into radiology, as Shay was saying. So I think that's fine totally as well. And it's a short interview, so these, even if there's one area which is a slightly weaker part of your portfolio, like it's forming a very small amount of a short interview, so there's plenty of chances to cover other things as well.
There was one question on Slido just asking about the length of the interview and how many questions you'd expect to try and get in that amount of time, and I guess kind of balancing length of answer with trying to get more questions in, and what you guys kind of thought about that.
Yeah, I think, covering reasonable volume of several different areas, I think, is the important thing. So I think you want reasonably brief answers, and as Jamie was saying, limit them to maximum 3 minutes, and get through as much stuff as you can so that you can show off all the different areas. So yeah, you want to be doing 5, 6, 7 questions at a thought. It'll go like a flash, I'm sure. So try and succinct and to the point as you can. And that comes with the practice, as Jamie mentioned. So do, practice with your friends, colleagues, people in radiology if you can, just to get things down to a really swift answer.
So we've got one question about radiology teaching. So they say some people suggest we avoid talking about radiology related stuff because you're not a radiologist, so you're not really in a position to provide that teaching. Does that sound reasonable, or what are your thoughts on that?
Can I come in on that? So I think you're right to a degree that obviously as F2s or as non-radiology trainees doing radiology teaching, they may find it quite interesting. But if you, for example, I did radiology teaching, but I did it with a consultant or senior trainee. And I think if you've done that, then definitely show it, because it shows commitment, and there's a lot of other things they can take out from that teaching. So I think, yeah, that's the way I would sell it.
So one question about membership exams. So the question is, if you're an F2 but haven't done MRCP or MRCS and get asked about why you haven't done them, then how would you go about tackling that question?
I think it would be a very harsh question.
Yeah, I don't think they'll ask why not.
Yeah.
I think it's more, if you've done it, then definitely say you've done it.
Exactly.
And it shows, clinical excellence and shows commitment. But I doubt they'll ask why you haven't done it. It's not expected.
Completely agree.
If they do ask that would be a more like, I would read that as quite a staged bad cop question.
Yeah.
I would use that as an opportunity to be like, because I was focusing on all these other amazing things.
Exactly.
So that's how I would answer that question, like as an F2, having not done MRCP or MRCS. I think that's.
But definitely, if you've done it, show it. That is something which will tick a lot of boxes if you've done it or done part of it.
Can I just say also, I think judging by the information from the college, the focus on the interview is really going to be on commitment to specialty and communication skills. So they're going to see, based on your online application form, whether you've done MRCS or MRCP or not. So I really can't see them asking in the interview, and they certainly wouldn't criticize anyone for not having done it.
So a few questions on, can you mention things that you haven't got written proof? I think both for teaching, audits, etc., etc. But it's an interview, so I can't imagine them asking you to produce proof as such, as long as you've got it on your application form, I would have thought. Yeah.
Well, sorry, I didn't quite get that. Sorry.
Sorry. So the questions were, so if you've done stuff but don't have any proof, can you still talk about them?
I guess the interview requires like your integrity, doesn't it? And you could get caught out by saying something, but yeah, they're not gonna want you to hold a certificate or something during the interview. It's going to be more generic type things and talking about projects that you've done. And the portfolio station, which is already assessed, before the interview, most likely will cover those kind of things where they want to see really specific proof that you have not made up this publication or this presentation. So yeah, I think that would be okay to talk about, as it's happened.
So the next question is, so as well as taster days, can you talk about optional modules at uni, for example, like a 4-week placement as a med student and things like that?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
I did an open uni course as part of my F3. Like, just talk about anything you've done that shows that you love radiology.
100%.
Anything, whenever it was.
I think there's some online courses as well which you can do, which are either free or things. So bring it all in, especially if it's radiology related.
I was just interested to hear a little bit, maybe from the ST1s, a little bit about your experiences, considering you've just been through the process last year. I don't know if there was anything you guys can share with us just about your own experience.
Yeah, we actually did a brief presentation. I can bring up some slides if you want. It's okay.
Yeah, that would be really good. Yeah.
Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So my name is Seth. I'm a ST1 at King's along with Shay, and we thought we'll just talk a bit about our experience of the interview. So what we want to talk about was on the day, our experience, some of the questions that we had, how we prepared, and what our main tips were. A lot of the stuff has already been covered very well by James and Matt, but we'll give our own experience of that. So on the day experience, for us, it was slightly different because we had 2 stations, and it was there we had to go to the college, we had to go to HE and do it, and it was 10 minutes, so it'll be slightly different, 15 minutes, but the commitment specialty I think will be the same. We had 2 panelists, so 2 radiology consultants, and they took turns to ask the questions. I think it was probably about 4 or 5 questions they asked, so it was one after the other. They just give you time to answer, and once they asked the questions, they were quite fair and allowed you time to respond. And they kind of led on. So whatever you said in one of the questions, they kind of went on and talked about it. Shay, was there anything else from your on the day experience?
No, not really. Just that it went quite quickly, and they did give you time to answer your questions, but they also wanted to kind of move things on a bit so they could ask you as many questions as they could to get you the max sort of points.
Yeah. And so some of the questions we had were some of the things that Matt and James talked about. I think the big one is why radiology, because it can kind of help them to understand where you've come from and why you've made the decision, so you can bring in all your experience and commitment. And then the other questions are around how much do you know about the radiology training, how much do you understand about the challenges. This quite interesting questions I think, Shay, you got was, what in your current job will you miss about radiology? So I think that's a question you have to really think about, and then sell it and turn it in a way that what you can gain from radiology as well. And then understanding the role of the radiologist, both in the MDT and what does a consultant do on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, Shay, did you want to go through?
Yeah, so preparation, I think this is just the biggest piece of advice. Just keep practicing your answers out loud. That is what I would say. I think that's what we both did when we discussed this. They use the same questions again and again, and there are a few that you might be able to preempt. So someone asked about whether they could bring up COVID questions. Potentially, I think it'd be fair. So, have something in your back pocket for that. But I would really advise just practicing your answers and practice saying them, between, 2 and 3 minutes, maybe I'd say 2 minutes really. Just practice getting that out with people who can give you feedback. I found that really, really helpful because the 10 minutes goes by so quickly. Courses are helpful, like this one. I think we both attended courses last year, didn't we, Saif?
Yeah, we did.
And I think it's just a good way to just get you into the zone, ready for the sorts of questions you might be asked.
Yeah.
There's lots of stuff online. So Radiology Cafe, Radiology Nation, and just know your CV, know the sort of like top 5 things you want to make sure you muscle in, no matter what questions they ask. There is usually a way to talk about this thing that you want to talk about. So just know yourself really well, and just make sure you can
I think
get those
that's
in.
Probably the most important thing. Know yourself and your unique selling point, even if it's in any question that comes up, try to bring that in, because it's about you. And I think either James or Matt were saying this is a chance to show your achievements, sell yourself, because they don't have anything in front of you. So they're relying on you to tell them. If you don't tell them anything, they don't, they're just going to mark you accordingly. So every question, try to bring in what you've done to show it, whether that be taster week, whether that be, even what does a consultant radiologist do? Say, during my taster week, I saw that the consultant radiologist did this, this, and this. So bring in what you've done as well. And the other thing is, if you can, practice with other people who are doing it as well, because then they can give you feedback and you can help them out. So I think that helps as well.
And just one other thing I just remembered is some of the things that you might feel might be weaknesses. So, you've done years of another specialty or whatever, really are probably your strengths if you just spin them properly. So I would really just work on whatever you've learned from wherever you've been. As I said, I was completely non-clinical last year, but I talked mostly about a lot of that stuff because it's relevant, and a lot of those interviews will sound very similar to them. So it's not a bad thing to stand out.
Yeah, and I came from surgery, so I had core surgical training, and then did a similar year to Shay in education. So they like to see something a bit different. So if you have that, don't be afraid. If you've done another specialty before, or even if you come from F2 and done something a bit different, show that, and don't be afraid to show that. I thought this was one of the courses we went to. It was a quite nice diagram to say what the commitment to specialty is all about. So there's 4 main things which everyone's talked about: enthusiasm for the specialty, understanding the life as a trainee, understanding life as a radiology consultant, and then suitability for the job. And they're going to ask probably one question of each from those. So try to just prepare that and try to bring that in your achievements. And then the other one, which was quite good, was this table, which demonstrates some of the strengths and challenges of radiology. Again, that's been, we've gone through that, but if you can make sure you have these questions on lock, you're able to talk about the challenges in detail and you know about them, then they'll know that you've spent time in the department, you've researched what the challenges are, and you're excited about starting radiology. And finally, Shay, do you want to do the top tips?
So just be prepared, keep preparing, keep practicing. It will go quickly, so just be ready. Try and personalize your answers and just be yourself, basically, and just try to weave that throughout all of your answers. Talk about all the good things that you've done, talk about your taster week, obviously dress smart, and just try and be relaxed, smile, try to enjoy it. I know it's quite difficult, it's gonna be quite a high stress scenario, but if you can try, that'll be really good. And I've just had a thought that just because you're talking to 2 consultant radiologists, radiologists, and to be honest, I think most specialties like when you are just like, when you've taken a keen interest. So just litter your answers with, when I spoke to a consultant radiologist, I've been talking to the trainees, they like when people, show real genuine interest. So just try and keep it personal, and you'll be fine. Yeah, and the more you prepare, the more you practice, the smoother the interview will go, and the more you'll enjoy it. And at the end of the day, this is what you want to do. So this is a chance to sell yourself and then get the dream radiology job. I think that's it. Yep.
Amazing, thank you. Just, I think there was a quick question. I know you mentioned a couple of courses. I think they were asking which courses were they, and were there any in particular you recommended?
There was one both of us went to at Whittington Hospital. I can't remember the name. Which I think that was the only one I went to, actually. It's called Radiology Success. Radiology Success. I don't know if it's probably will be going on this year. But yeah, Radiology Success is called.
Yeah, it's based at the Whittington Hospital. A lot of the courses are good. I would say that the main thing I took from some of the courses was just how to kind of sort my portfolio out. And I know that you guys have already done that. So, yeah. I mean, it's up to you if you want to go on a paid course, but I don't necessarily think it's essential. But
yeah, it's not, definitely not. And I think if you can form a group and form a network of people, or even, as I think even Matt or James was saying, at your local hospital, speak to the radiology trainees to run a mock with you. Yeah. Those sort of things will be really beneficial. I think the thing about the course, which I found useful, was the mock at the end. So I think if you can easily get that, elsewhere, you don't have to pay money for that.
So kind of following on from that, we've got a question on what reading materials and resources would you recommend to get some knowledge of the advancement in radiology and some of the new technologies that are coming out?
As part of my prep for pretty much any interview, just I read the most recent ClinRad publication, and I kind of flicked through. I like qualitative research, and they happened to have one on the perception of interventional radiology amongst undergrad medical students, and I just had that in my back pocket just in case I was asked. I wasn't, but that's that shows commitment, I guess. I would honestly say the biggest source of information for radiology are the trainees. All the consultants. I mean, I don't know if you think different, Safe, but
yeah, I completely agree with all that Shay said. I think Radiology Cafe is a very good website, and I think that's a good starting point. And then that can help to direct you on the sort of questions they ask, and then you can research that on the internet to find out a bit more information. But if you're stuck, then that's a good place to start.
I just wanted to quickly ask Andrea about her experience of applying last year as well, and just find out a bit more about
that. Cool, thanks. So I'm actually a foreign trainee, so I think my experience is a little bit different. I don't know if foreigners are allowed to, I think they are allowed to apply this year as well in first round. So my tip would be to really know your CV really well and show that off when you get when you have your interview, because every CV is different. Even if you are a trainee from the UK, every CV is different. Not everyone's going to have a radiology audit. They might have an audit in something else. Like my audit was kind of software IT implementation in a district hospital in South Africa, and they really liked that. And I kind of sold it in a way that showed that I'm really interested in using information systems and IT in my daily practice. So you can literally sell any part of your CV, you can sell to them. But in order to do that, you really need to know your CV quite well, and you need to practice a lot, because we had two stations, one that was commitment to specialty and one was that describe your CV. And that was 20 minutes in total, and that went really quickly. So if you've only got 15 minutes, it's going to be even faster. So that would be probably my biggest tip, is just practice. Write down on a piece of paper the salient points that you want to sell about yourself and what evidence you have to speak to those points about yourself.
Thank you very much. All really, really useful and interesting points. Just having a look to see if there's any other questions.
There is one, which is, so if you applied for radiology training last year and unsuccessful, how would you show your commitment to specialty if you haven't been able to kind of get involved in publications or posters because of the pandemic? Is there any way you'd kind of think about framing your answers in that scenario?
Probably how you've developed your skills in the past year. So not specifically just to radiology, how you've developed your skills in audit practice, undertaking more of those kind of things are really useful. I think that the examiners will probably be a lot more sympathetic in terms of like how much true radiology experience you might have, because you've maybe been redeployed or anything like that, but you need to show some kind of growth and development over the last year.
So we've got one question about how interviewers feel about outside, like experiences outside medicine, like, you know, say if you've done startup things or medical law thing, does that seem like it's not commitment to the field, or is it kind of seen as complementary?
I think go for it. As long as you're confident to speak about it, and as long as you think it's relevant. I think it's interesting. I talked about being a teaching assistant at primary school. They liked it, they were interested in it. So I think go for it. If that's where you got your experience from, then that's okay.
And I think the other point is, if you don't do extracurricular stuff like, you know, university, you did sports, or, you know, it shows you're a rounded person. You're not just all about medicine. And that helps to portray a positive personality. So I think one of the questions they asked me, what's your greatest achievement? And I talked about a charity thing which I'd done and set up. So it wasn't related to medicine, but actually it showed a lot of leadership and all that sort of stuff I brought in. So I think just whatever unique selling points you have, bring that out, if that's with medicine or without medicine.
And also, as much as the interview feels like a tick boxing exercise, and I'm sure this year it feels like that even more, they really like different things. As everyone said, everyone's given little different things that they did during the application, and the examiners respond quite well to that. So it actually speaks to you being rounded, interested in other things, being able to handle a lot of you know, things going on, not just solely being like medical. So it's actually a good thing, and I think you should try bring it up.
So one more question I had is that, say if you're thinking about doing interventional radiology, how much should you kind of show your interest in IR? Like, would it be seen as a bit presumptive, or if you're really, you know, really interested in it, do you think we should spend a lot of time talking about it? What would be the panel's thoughts on that?
I think I'd be a bit careful about like just focusing just on that and saying you're definitely sure you want to do that. I think kind of talking about why you're interested in it and what you've seen, what you've done again on your taster weeks or on your experience is a really good thing. But I would also stress that you're open-minded and looking forward to all aspects of radiology, because the chances are you won't be interviewed by an interventional radiologist just by pure numbers. And I think that they would appreciate the more you showing you're open-minded and looking forward to learning all aspects of radiology. But if you've got an interest in that, then it's a great thing to talk about again, and it's a reason why you want to do radiology, and it shows you understand radiology and you've done a bit of prep and research beforehand. But I'd be a bit careful about saying I just want to do IR, you know, not interested in anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Matt. I think there's a you know, a perception, I don't know, slightly you know, misguided perception, but there's certainly a perception that some ex-surgical some sort of ex-surgical you know, core trainees maybe coming into radiology specifically to do IR. I just think you need to be, you know, balanced and rounded, and just say that you know, you're looking forward to all aspects of radiology, because you certainly, you know, even if you want to do IR, that's brilliant, but you need to train as a diagnostic radiologist at the same time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered pretty much all of the questions. And I think we've had a really in-depth discussion about interviews and covered a lot of ground. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of our panelists today. It's been a really, really useful session for everyone, I think, and for both me and Indra as well, who are also applying. So I think we've all found it really, really useful. So we just wanted to extend our gratitude to all of you guys. Yeah, I think that's it from everyone. So thank you guys again. And the very last thing to mention is we'll be posting our feedback form on the group as well. So if everyone could please fill that out, that would be really, really helpful. And then we can get that over to you guys as well if that's useful for you. But yeah, thanks again, guys, and we'll see you guys later.
Cheers.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks.
Thanks.
See you.
Take care.
Good luck.